Okay, good morning, everyone. I see people coming in. I'm just waiting for everyone to be in. So welcome, everyone. Welcome to the second day of the I-HE2020 Online Bridging event. And I will just shortly discuss a few technical things with you. And could you do it? So I'm Lizzie Konings, and next to me you see Fenna Adriaanse. We are the technical hosts of today, and just some technicalities today. All sessions will be recorded, and if you have any questions, you can use the Q&A box, which you see below. And there is also another function, which is the chat function. So feel free to introduce yourself, tell us where you're from, and what the weather is like, for example. And the presentations and recordings will be shared after the 3-day conference. And now I would like to give the floor to George Ubachs, who is the Managing Director of IHE2020 and the host of today. So George, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thanks, Lizzie. So second day, I hope you were all present yesterday to be part of this the interesting kickoff that we did yesterday on the University of the Future. Today we will look this morning first at the training event of Embed, but I'm going to share my screen for my PowerPoint now. Check so that you can see the full program of today. Let's get it full screen. Yeah, so this morning the Embed training session, and then this afternoon at 2 we kick off with the afternoon session on micro-credentials, fully dedicated to micro-credentials this afternoon, as this is a priority topic within the universities. This morning, the focus title is Blended Learning After COVID-19. It will be the first block of a two-morning session of training on blended education. But I first would like to sketch the situation of the COVID, the Corona crisis that has challenged us as higher education institutions and educators and students in the immediate response. There's emergency remote education, as is the term now used, to take it up and try in first instance to keep the agenda of the students as it is and have remote teaching by online provision. Mostly that means that universities have their teachers presenting the full session as on campus, but then in an online mode. This is about this morning, and the other sessions are about what is next, how to improve that. Part of that is not only that we have this online, sometimes only talking heads, which is used to reach out to the students, but also when it's possible that you have students in the on the campus, but then limited numbers, and then you have a combination of presence education and students online, which is we refer to as synchronous hybrid education. Then we have the possibility of blended education as an answer, in which we have now in the Corona crisis more the focus on online than face-to-face, and then we have the full online education. So improvisation was needed now up to now in many universities. It was much appreciated, but also the conclusion is for this for the future we have to be better prepared and professionalized. So the highest priority is with the further education of educators in digital didactics. That is the next step. And part of elements of professional online education is that education is built on expertise and experience. It is methodologically designed education. It's well considered digital didactics used, so research-based. There is elements of interaction, debate, dialogue, so not only talking heads online, but really interactive and activating education, in which we engage students in also by knowledge video clips, serious gaming, student peer meetings, and so on. And it's about extending and enriching programs by virtual mobility, which is now also an important option of keeping students mobile. Actually, tomorrow afternoon, there's a dedicated session on that, and the use of safe software. So all these are elements on professionalizing online education as a next step after the emergency education, with the main message: do not copy on-campus education, but use new modes of teaching to enhance education. What is needed now is that we are sharing expertise. So there's a wealth of research and experience in this field. We need to face challenges of digitalization. That means that not postponing it, like we can imagine 100 things, aspects why we can't do it, but it's very important to start and take all the challenges short term and building up to a full program. But but really start with taking up the challenge of digitalization in your institution, and start the discussion within your institution and also with companies who are often also innovators in supporting systems. So on what the institution needs to support their strategies in further digitalizing their education. So next step to be considered is that every educational institution needs to reconsider its own educational model. Most urgently educate the educators in the use of digital didactics. The educator needs to shift its tasks even more from provider to developer, and evaluate and innovate your education. What IHE2020 is doing, so IHE2020 has several initiatives in this field. First of all, we launched a call for universities that have an expertise in the field of going online and the use of new modes of teaching. We invited them to share on this dedicated website that we have guidelines, examples, good practices, and universities that are looking for this expertise can find this here. You see here an example of some of the contributions that you can find here. So this is really input from universities that are leading in online and the use of new modes of teaching, that share their expertise here on this website. Then we have, and we will talk about this for this morning and tomorrow, about the MOOC on blended education that is available to support universities. We have a full website, Empower website, on the use of new modes of teaching and learning, in which we are covering 12 fields of expertise that are related to that. You can find publications here, recordings of webinars, instruments to support you in further digitalizing your education. An important backbone, which was developed by IHE2020, is the e-excellence tool. It's an instrument to assess by benchmarking the quality of your online education performance. It is an instrument that you can use online easily by quick scan, but you can also have online support by experts or on-site support by experts that are part of the IHE2020 network. With the benchmarking, quality benchmarking in online education, we provide actually, in summary, a guided discussion within your institution on how you cover provision of online education and where you can improve on 35 benchmarks. Now, coming to Embed, also a part of IHE2020, as we are the coordinator of that. When we started Embed, it was about introducing innovation in higher education by creating a reference model for developing and implementing blended learning. And this in the partnership of most advanced universities in this field. Therefore, we involved KU Leuven, Delft University, and University of Edinburgh, together with Aarhus, TAMK, DCU in Dublin. And altogether, we have been working on 3 years on this maturity model, and we are now at the final stage, as we're going to show in this training session. What we offer here is that we have support by a framework for pedagogical and institutional change and a multi-level maturity model at micro level, so teaching learning processes, the meso level about institutional innovation and enabling strategies, but also the macro level. We also reach out to governmental policies to support further uptake of online education and blended modes. The stakeholders for Embed are internally the learners, of course, teaching staff, teaching learning departments, technology departments, university leadership. I hope they are all present here today. And we have the external stakeholders at the policy level, the governments, European university networks, and the EU. This is the website. I'm not going to explain this. This will be explained by KU Leuven and Delft today and tomorrow. But this is the website where you can, after the training, you can all find a lot of information on Embed. And this is what I refer to as the MOOC on making blended education work on the portal of FutureLearn. The training program will look as follows. We will start now with defining blended learning, teaching, and education by Veerle van Rompuy from the KU Leuven and Wiebe Dijkstra from the TU Delft. After that, we have a short break, and then we come with good practice from KU Leuven, and then we have time for questions and answers. Tomorrow, we will continue this training session, and then we will have the maturity model in the context specifically of COVID-19. And we have breakout sessions then. So then you will be grouped by other attendees in peer sessions. And then after the break, we will continue with explanation of the MOOC, the Embed MOOC that was developed. I guess this is sufficient as an introduction, and would like to give the floor to Veerle and Wiebe to start defining the blended learning definition.
Okay.
Yeah. Yep. Oh, sorry.
Okay. Sharing my screen now. Okay. So together with Wiebe Dijkstra from TU Delft, myself, Veerle van Rompuy from KU Leuven, we'll talk about the process that led us to the European Maturity Model for Blended Education. There are some slides here that George already presented, so I'm going to quickly go over them. With regard to the strategic partnership, this is a slide you already saw. Why did we create this partnership and what did we want to do? Who's in the partnership? We already had that slide. And now we come to the process. The process that led us to the maturity model. We started off with a conceptual and descriptive framework. Now, all the data results you will see here today are pre-COVID, of course. So you should also look upon it like that. So it's pre-COVID data. We started off with a literature study, thinking about concepts about what blended learning was to us, how we would define it. I come back to that later. After that, we designed some instruments to monitor blended learning, to go to teaching staff, to go to policymakers, to have an idea of what's blended learning to them. So what do they think blended learning is? Why did they start with blended learning? Out of all that material, so the conceptual descriptive framework, interviews we did, also surveys we did, Delphi research we did. That was all input for the maturity model and the monitor. George already also mentioned the MOOC, so we also made a MOOC which encompasses all the material we had in the project, in the Embed project. And we are also, for the moment, busy on the policy impact and how we can have institutional change and institutional trajectories. So also the macro level, the policy level, of course, is important for that. In this presentation, we will present like the three starting points, like the conceptual framework, the design, the instruments, some results from this research, and then the maturity model and monitor. I will do the first two parts, so conceptual and descriptive framework and monitoring instruments, some results, and then we will take over to present the maturity model and the validation of the model. Okay, if we look at how did we work towards that maturity model, we started off with a literature study just to have a clear view on what to us would be considered as blended learning, blended teaching, blended education. I'll come back to the definitions straight on. Then we also compiled a repository of blended learning cases. So mainly blended learning courses, some programs as well. For example, from TAMK, we have quite some programs as well in it. And we decided, okay, we're going to interview the lecturers of those courses just to have an idea, what are the drivers? Why do they start blended learning? Why did they start it? What are enablers? How, as an institution, can you enable lecturers when you want to implement blended learning? And of course, we also, this is the part that we did after that, we did also interviews with policymakers. For example, vice deans, department heads, people from teaching and learning labs, just to have an idea how do they support blended learning, online learning, those things. How do they already support them? So what is their view on that? I'll come back to that also later on. And then we have had also interviews with blended learning experts. So outside the Embed project, a Delphi study was set up just to define and describe the dimensions and the criteria we have had for the maturity model. So we had quite a lot of dimensions and criteria that we talked about that came out of the two first steps, like the literature study, the repository, the interviews, ideas from policymakers. We were like busy with quite a lot of dimensions and criteria. And then we went to external experts, blended learning experts, just to validate those dimensions and criteria. So to have an idea, okay, what are maturity levels? So we will also present this part of the study. So what are we blending? If we look at blended learning, what are we actually blending then? Okay, the guy wants to stay. Okay, so actually it's a blend of what happens in a traditional classroom. What are the characteristics of a traditional classroom teaching? So it's facilitated, it's personalized, it's class-based instruction. You have a personal learning community with tutorials, seminars, lectures, things like that. And then you have the online learning part. So that's independent, it's flexible, it's timely. You have the virtual instruction forums, also webinars, online learning communities, MOOCs as well, for example. Everything can be done in your own time, actually. So you choose when to learn. So you take actually characteristics of both and put them in the blend, go to blended learning like that. For us, we also, of course, work with definitions so that we could go to the teachers and to the policymakers with an idea of what do we consider to be blended learning, because you have all sorts of definitions, of course, and we had quite some time, and quite some discussions about that. But perhaps maybe I could also first refer to hybrid learning, because that's a question we get a lot. Like, oh, is this then hybrid learning, or what is hybrid learning? Now, it's not that easy to define hybrid learning. Also here, many discussions are going around about what is hybrid learning. George already mentioned hybrid learning as well in the introduction. For most part, it's actually a way of combining the traditional classroom experiences, experiential learning objectives, and digital course delivery that emphasizing using the best option for each learning objective. So for an individual learning experience, an individual student, choosing the best option to learn something. So it's not really about the blend of your online and your offline, but about this optimal individual learning experience. And it doesn't necessarily have to be with a remote component. So it doesn't have to be necessarily a remote component, even doing like what you see quite a lot in secondary school settings, that you have learning station rotations inside the classroom, where one of the stations, for example, includes an online learning element. So that could also be considered as hybrid learning. So it's quite a lot that the term encompasses quite a lot of different types of learning. But actually, for the moment and in these times, you would quite, as an example, you would get this view, of course. So you have the students, some students that are present in the classroom, the physical classroom, and then students that are present via the online link, so that in real time are present in the classroom, where you have some sort of, which is also called a virtual lab, virtual classroom setting. Now, this is a photograph that's only taken like this week at KU Leuven. So this was the situation we were in this week. But if I just to refer to the COVID situation, this is a photograph that we will not be taking today or any other day in the coming month, because we now are on Code Red and we are completely online now. So this type of situation where we still would have the hybrid learning, the physical classroom combined with the virtual classroom, is now not possible anymore here in Belgium. So we are now completely online. So we're moving very quick between states of education, modes of education, which for our teaching staff is not always very easy, you can imagine. In that respect, if we look at blended learning, the teaching staff we interviewed at KU Leuven with regard to their blended learning practices, I already talked to some of them now in the COVID situation, and they said that of course they are better prepared to handle the situation. And they're, of course, also on a technical point of view, they're better prepared to give their class now completely online. For them, it is an advantage, of course, that they were already in the blended mode. Okay, if we go further by defining the blend, like what did we consider in the projects? I stress it's in the project as blended learning. Then it is learning as a result of a deliberate integrated combination of online and face-to-face learning activities. So the word deliberate is very important here as well. So it's not like, out of the blue, just because of circumstances, I now have an online and a face-to-face activity. No, it has to be like a deliberate design, intended design to integrate those both settings, so the online and the face-to-face learning activities. So deliberate is important here in the definition. What do we consider then blended teaching? That's designing it, facilitating, so designing and facilitating the blended learning activities. And then also blended education. These are then the formal context. So the formal context where blended learning happens. So it's determined by policies and conditions with regard to how you organize and how you support blended learning. So it's the organization and the support that you have for blended learning, all the regulations you have about that, which is the blended education setting. So it's more of the context that you work in. In the project, as already mentioned by Georges, we had three levels of where we went to see, okay, what is going on in blended learning? You have the blended learning, you have the teaching, which is at a micro level. So teaching staff teaching a course and students following the blended learning course. So that's on course program micro level. We did some interviews there with teaching staff. I'll come back to that later. And then you have the conditions and the policies I talked about. And they're at the meso level, so the institution level. We talked about with policymakers there, so to have an idea of what is the policy of this institution, what are the guidelines? Do they have a strategic policy, for example? Do they have a support system in place? If so, what sort of a support system? What is their vision? What is their mission? Do they deem this important? Things like that. So all these type of questions were discussed with policy makers inside our institutions. And then you have the macro level rule. Of course, there are also rules, regulations. Well, I say of course, but in many countries, there are not even rules and regulations strictly only for blended education, of course, but rules, regulations, policies at the macro level. So at governmental level, in the society, what do people think blended learning should be? Why should we do blended learning? Is it regulated? Maybe it isn't regulated. Maybe it's just on a higher level regulation in the sense of about online learning or things like that. That's at a macro level where for the moment we are busy interviewing policymakers at a macro level to have an insight in that level as well. Okay, I will start with just giving an idea of what's what are people doing at a micro level. So what is teaching staff doing at a micro level and how can we discuss this? So actually this is about blended learning practices in their context. We did an interview, so we have 26 cases over the partners, so that partners that you have seen, so it's a European consortium. So with the 6 embedded partner universities, where we have 7 cases in humanities, so philosophy, linguistics, cultural studies, psychology. We have 6 cases in economics, business economics, information management, then 10 cases in exact sciences and in research methods, and then 3 cases in medical sciences, for example, nurses training, for example. So what we did was we interviewed the lecturers and we also did an online survey upfront asking them about their the frequency of their learning activities, the tools they used as in order to create a blended learning wave. So what does this look like, the blended learning wave? What do we, how do we depict that? So you have the online components of a course, then you have the offline components, the face-to-face components of a course, and of course you have the element of time. So and then you will come to a wave in this sense that you have, for example, this is an example of a course, you have an online elements such as watch a certain video, read material online, and do an online quiz. That can all be done online by the students, and then the next face-to-face gathering, so the lesson, the face-to-face gathering in the classroom, the lecturer can say, okay, we're gonna discuss the quiz then in the face-to-face setting, and I also will be giving, there also will be peer instruction. Okay, then students will go back home, go online, they can do calculations, they can read a paper, whatever that they can do online. And then again, they come back to the classroom, the face-to-face setting, discussing the calculations they did. And perhaps they will have a more in-depth lecture about certain concepts of the course they are taking. So then in this way, you come to the wave. So that's why we call it the blended learning wave. So you have a sort of offline and online learning activities that alternate in this sense. So then you have the blended learning wave. If you look at the lecturers we interviewed, so the courses we took a look at, I talked about the online survey we did upfront before we went interviewing them. We asked them, okay, what are the learning activities that you use? So there was a list of learning activities and they could say, okay, I'm using it, I'm not using it. I'm only doing this online, I'm only doing this offline. I'm doing this online as well as offline. It's especially instructor-led or it's student-led. Now, you see that most of activities, if you look at the table here, most of activities are instructor-led. So very few student-led, although if you look at exercises and assignments, you will have some student-led activities as well. I don't think it's a surprising fact that quite a lot of lectures and tutorials are mentioned. So lectures and tutorials are like sort of #1 of learning activities. And they can be as well online as offline or a combination of both. Also, what was mentioned quite a lot of times is exercises, assignments, so problem-solving things. Problem-solving assignments as well. And if you look at that, you see that in quite a lot of times it was mentioned. And we see that actually this type of assignments, learning activities, are in quite a lot of cases the starting point for starting blended learning. So quite a lot of lecturers tell us like, okay, yes, I was looking for, you know, how can I solve this problem of exercises? They have to do exercises, but of course they also need to have the theoretical base to do that. But I want to be able to have more like active learning, to have more exercises, to have them more involved in problem solving. So that's quite a lot of times the starting point for a lecturer to say, okay, I'm just switching to blended learning. That's something that we saw quite a lot. And then also very surprising is the student-generated content. So quite a lot of courses talked about students generating their own content, like student generating blogs, vlogs, articles, websites, things like that. Also reflective journals are used quite a lot in the blended learning practices. So this was quite an interesting element. I'm also presenting some blended learning practices from KU Leuven later on. And there we will also, I will also come back to that because you also have there an element of student generated content. So that's some of the interesting results that come out of the online survey we did before we interviewed the lecturers. If you then look at the interviews, so we interviewed them and then we, of course, asked them, why did you start blended learning? Why did you, as a teacher, say, okay, I want to do blended learning? So what are the drivers for doing that? And what enabled you to do it? And what still continues to enable you to do it? Because, of course, you could also say, I'm just quitting it. It's no use anymore. So you have the individual drivers, well, less enablers, but especially drivers. And you have institutional, external drivers going on there. I'm going into that now. If you look at individual drivers, so why do people feel the urge to do blended learning? Especially what was mentioned was to enrich the learning experience. And here I come back to the question or the focus on problem solving. So making students more involved in problem solving, have more active learning, have more authentic cases as well. So really support engagement and build a community outside of the classroom. Because most of the teachers said, yeah, if they're outside the classroom, if you're in a traditional face-to-face classroom setting and course, if they're outside the classroom, you don't have that, well, if you don't have a view on the community anymore as well, so you can't engage them anymore. So that's also why they individually started blended learning. Here is a quote of one of the interviews. So for 25 years, I've been trying to find ways of helping students with turning theory into conceptual thinking and into problem solving. So we heard that quite a lot. So they wanted to free up class time, try to replace that for conceptual thinking. So do the exercises on your own. So make sure that and then you can come back to the classroom, and then we can also go into the concept and the conceptual thinking behind it, so that you come to a better problem solving. Also, a lot of teachers mentioned more interactive teaching, that they wanted to teach more in an interactive way. A quote from a teacher here: until now, so the normal way of teaching was a teacher standing up at the blackboard and the students sitting in a chair. So we wanted to change that form of teaching into a more interactive form of education. Quite a lot of times mentioned as well. Also, a lot of lecturers were also worried and engaged in the skills that students should have for their future careers. So they mentioned, okay, my students, they should learn to work in a team. They should learn how to collaborate, and not just in this classroom, also outside the classroom. They should learn how to work with these tools, with various tools. For example, building websites, they should learn how to do that. For example, doing Zoom calls, they should learn how to do that. Also, they need to learn to search for reliable information, was also actually mentioned. And also they need to learn to apply theories in practice. That's most of the time when you go to the courses, the more science courses, biomedical courses, where you have, like, for example, if you have like a course for nurses, you also have the theory and the practice that is important. So therefore, they also sometimes started blended learning. Flexibility and internationalization, yeah, because quite some university, if not all, of course, are reaching out for international students, students that live far from the campus. And so they say, okay, we also want them to be able to follow a course at our university. And I also want to have these international students, and also students with certain disabilities or students with a different educational context. So that's also something. So you can be more flexible towards those groups as well. And then the personal interest, of course. You have quite a lot of teachers, lecturers that like to experiment with tools, that like to go for new ways of teaching. So there are actually, those are mostly the front runners in this new ways of teaching. The people that like to experiment with tools, with technologies, or the people that are actually in research on teaching methods. So they do research on teaching methods, and they also implement that in their own teaching practice. That's more the personal interest, of course. And there are also institutional drivers, of course. Your institution may want to improve the success rate of your students. So, for example, a good example, so 70% of the influx should obtain their bachelor's degree within 4 years. That was more or less the main goal. So then you have an institutional driver, a strategy that tells you, okay, we should go for other forms of teaching if we want to improve success rates. So that's also in the university level strategy. There's a strong hint, quite a lot of lecturers also mentioned from the university, that things should be blended or they should be online. Also mentioned, the one big driver was a university statement, I think 2 years ago, that they would expect all students to have the opportunity to take at least one fully online course. So, and from the online courses, then came the blended courses. We see that also quite a lot. And then you have the external drivers in terms of requirements. So how do you manage assignments for large groups of students? How do you do peer reviews? And of course, now I just added, this is the pandemic. Of course, it's an external driver. In this sense, how are you going to continue with your teaching in the best possible way in this situation? So that is actually a completely external driver. Actually also steers, of course, the university, the institutional strategy, your individual strategy. It's actually a good example of an external driver. Then the enablers. So what works? If you want to have people in blended teaching, in blended learning, what works. As an institution, you could support the development of online materials, for example, videos. You could also fund new ways of teaching, of course. For example, the faculty could fund this. This could be also institution-wide funded funding schemes or calls. You could also go for extra staff, for example, teaching assistants. Quite a lot lecturers told us, okay, we couldn't have done this without a team of people. So without our teaching assistant or without a designer helping us. So the extra staff can be quite an important element to enable teaching staff to go for new ways of teaching. Also follow up on it. So make sure that people are able to share their experience with colleagues. So feature them, for example, make them ambassadors of your blended learning practices, of your new teaching ways. That's what, for example, happens at the TU Delft, at Wiebes Institution, where they have also ambassadors for that. You see actually also a photograph of the accommodation at TU Delft, or the teaching lab here on the right, and for me it's the right-hand side. Okay. So also technically see that it's either centralized or maybe it's faculty-based, but that you have help desks, because quite a lot of times, you know, that's the first enabler. So if the technology doesn't work, people just give up. They say like, okay, I'm not able to do this. I'm not able to go into this call, whatever, the technology doesn't work. I'm not doing this. So that's quite also an important one, an important enabler when you start doing blended education. And then you also, what could also be very interested, what they also mentioned as an enabler is like a project-oriented approach within a design team. So that you make sure that teachers are embedded in a design team that helps them to do, turn their classroom, face-to-face classroom lecture into a blended learning course. So that's instead of like just find your way, so do it on your own. We don't mind, just whatever. So try to have it like project oriented with a design team is very important as well. Of course, the time for developments. We know that like quite a lot of lecturers, of course, a lot of teaching staff, the faculty, they also have to publish, of course, and do the academic research. And so they have limited amount of time. So that could be interesting to give them time for development. And peer pressure is also helpful. Maybe it would not be like a university strategy to pressure everybody into blended learning. But if you are like with a group of people doing blended learning and you're new to that, so that could help that your peers are also involved in that and then tell you what you could do, what the possibilities are. And there could also be, you know, still, of course, enablers. They had to come. Okay, what are challenges that we see and future trends, of course? So challenges still in applying learning analytics, of course. For the moment, at KU Leuven as well, we have like quite a lot of descriptive analytics about blended learning courses we run, about online courses. But we would like to have that also on a more advanced level. So with recommender systems to the students so that it could be more flexible and more individually oriented. Also more predictive. Okay, maybe if this person is following this course, he could also be interested in that part of that course. So more of an advanced level of learning analytics. Also the adaptivity in a blended learning approach. So more basic researches or basic exercises for students that need the basic exercises. And then you also have more the challenging ones for the ones who can handle it. Also someone mentioned, okay, this is the minimum that you have to do. And then this is the exam for that. And if you take the exam and you do the minimum, then you get a 6 or 7, no more. But if you're willing to take up a challenge, so then this is the target exam for an 8. So then you can have a higher grade. And if you really want to be challenged, there's a 3rd exam. And then this lecturer said, I think this would help them as well. So to challenge them to so to have more adaptivity in the blended learning approach. Also, what we are experiencing right now is dealing with very large groups of students in blended learning or blended education. So that's for the moment, that is quite, a problem, the large groups, because most of the models we had and the courses we had in blended learning were like on a master's level, like on small group levels. So very large groups, how we do that, and the MOOC style of teaching as well. We had quite some calls, funding calls in our university, for example, for MOOCs, to design MOOCs, funded MOOCs then by the KU Leuven. But okay, how to insert this MOOC or the MOOC style into your course. That's something I will give you an example of how this can be done later on after the break. So MOOC style teaching is still for us a challenge as well, and maybe also a future trend. And of course, the COVID-19 pandemic and what happens afterwards, because now we drive a lot of teaching staff into online learning. For the moment, we are completely, so it's online learning. And blended previously, like still at the beginning of the week, it was more blended, that smaller groups of students could come to the classroom, the others were at home, and that you had quite a lot of, we had quite a lot of teaching staff going for the talking head, for the PowerPoint with the talking head, you can imagine. But we are also busy like, okay, how can we take that then to the next level when the COVID pandemic is over? Will there still be individual drivers, or will teachers say like, okay, this was such a tragedy for me, I hated it, because we had to do it quick, with not the right tools and not the right support, so I'm not ever going to do that again. So that could also be a scenario, so that we're looking at, okay, how are we going to handle this after the COVID-19 crisis? How are we going to make sure that teachers are going to look at the design of their course at that point? Now they definitely don't have the time to look at that. So to have a deeper insight on how to design a good course, how to design a good blended course. Now they're just, of course, it's all hands on, and they're just doing what they have to do, of course. So that's also a challenge we're facing. So some of the teachers also had some good advice. For example, don't fall into the trap of thinking that you make the material crisp and clear, as nice as you can, that all your problems are gone. So be very sensitive of whether the material is not too good, so that your students have the impression that they understand that. They did understand the story, so you bring it in a story, it's nice storytelling with a storyline, but that they actually don't understand the underlying concept. So that's what happens quite a lot, so that they say, okay, they get the story, they're like completely into the story, but they don't understand the underlying concept. So most of the times, that's what then in face-to-face classroom setting, when they come back to the classroom, what appears to the teacher like, okay, they don't understand the concept underlying what I put online. Okay. Also, okay, I think it's worthwhile doing so, but they have to be aware that it will cost time. It will not save you time. It will probably increase the efficiency of the course, but it will not save you time as a lecturer. So that's quite, some teachers always also said, like, the other faculty thought I was going like really crazy. What are you doing? It takes like a lot of time away from you. So it's a really time intensive investment. So lecturers should know that as well. And then actually also a good point, I'll come back to that later in the KU Leuven practices as well. So don't make everything blended. So the good things from the past, the good old lectures, keep them, is what one lecturer told us. And next to this, do things with a team. So a team of 2 or 3 is enough. And then you have to go for it. Mind the details, the quality of audio, the quality of your video, appointments with students, a study guide. Just choose your pet project And there in that project, go for quality and detail, but don't try to do everything blended. Don't make everything blended. I'll come back to that later as well, what the problem with that type of thinking is. We see that now also in the students. I will come back to that in the I-HE2020 practices, where the problems of such an approach of doing everything blended, where you come with challenges and problems, it comes with challenges and problems for the students as well. Okay, I move on to the meso level, which is the level of the institution. Okay, I'm just giving some examples so that you have an idea of what can be done in an institution with regard to strategy, to support. This is an example of TU Delft, where you have the cookbook. And the cookbook describes the requirements for lecture halls, for classrooms, for study workplaces. So the requirements of these type of classrooms at TU Delft. So you see here, okay, what's the seat capacity? And what is actually the type of teaching learning you can do in this type of lecture hall, in this type of room, and then with how many students. So actually a cookbook that you can consult. It's also online, you have the link here. At I-HE2020, we also have numerous of these type of support systems. For example, you have the, it's in Dutch, but it's about, okay, how to do asynchronous interaction, how to do synchronous interaction, and how to combine both. So when do you use asynchronous, when you do synchronous, and which tools can you use for that? When do you use Skype for Business, for example, or when can you use discussion fora, for example? How do you, Toledo is actually the I-HE2020 platform. And then you have the peer feedback, peer review can also be done asynchronous, can be done synchronous. So that's a I-HE2020-wide instructions or info that we also try to give. Again, an example from the TU Delft, where you have the new education building, the Pulse building, so where classrooms are not a traditional classroom, but are flexible. So they are all set up for blended learning, and you can be switching between project work and frontal instruction. So they're flexible classrooms, actually, also with a link here. So you can have a look at that yourself. At I-HE2020, we also have the I-HE2020 Learning Lab Academy. So there you have the training and also seminars about blended education. And it's as well for the teaching staff as for the support staff. So we have some quite a lot of support staff in education. So the I-HE2020 Learning Lab has an academy where we have support and trainings on different topics regarding blended education. Of course, I also talked about the importance, especially for first start in blended education, the importance of technological support. This is the screen of the I-HE2020 Knowledge Clip Studios. So where you can go to as a member of faculty, if you want to record knowledge clips for your course, you can go there and you have all the support you need from the I-HE2020 support team. The same goes for TU Delft. This is a screenshot of TU Delft, where you also have the a green key studio, so that you can also do knowledge clips and have parts of your lectures recorded as well. And there you also have the support to do that, because it's not easy if you're like a first-time user to do this all by yourself. Then at the macro level that we're still working on, so I talked about the interviews we have with policymakers at governmental level. I just gonna give some hints about that, or some points about governmental policy. It could be that teachers get paid based on hours in class, for example, or that reducing class time might be politically sensitive. Of course, if you pay people to be in class, that would be a problem if you reduce the class time. Some governments are promoting blended learning with grant programs for digital education, for example. So inside then the overarching digital education call, you can also have blended learning supported grants for blended learning, for blended education. So if you look at all this material I presented, this is all input for the maturity model. So I will now hand the floor to Wiebe, who will talk you through the maturity model. I'm stopped sharing my presentation.
Okay, I'm going to start my presentation. Let's see. Share. And I hope you can see my screen. We need to go to the maturity model. Yes. I'm going to show you the maturity model, what the Maturo has become. Yeah, it's an you can see it as a model, as a conceptual framework. But before we dive into the framework, I first need to stress that maturity isn't the same as quality. There is a difference. It isn't a quality framework we've created, but a maturity framework. And I will show you a screen with a definition of maturity. So I give you a couple of seconds to read this. So the maturity model, the European maturity model for blended learning, is really focused on the continuous improvement, in this case, of blended learning and blended education. As we said before, this maturity model, we define it in 3 levels. So we have the course level. This is really about creating a blended learning course. So you also saw some examples. So for example, using a blended learning wave to create a nice flow for the students. And this course level has 7 dimensions, and I will explain them later. And each dimension has 3 indicators, and these indicators can help you to assess where your course, your blended learning course is, and how you can improve to reach the highest level of maturity. And the highest level of maturity, again, is about continuous improving that specific dimension. Besides the course level, we also have the program level, and this is really focused on educational programs. So for example, a bachelor program or a master program. And on the program level, we defined 6 dimensions. And again, each dimension has 3 indicators, from the lowest maturity to the highest maturity level. And the last one is the institution level. And this is really focusing on an institution. So this could be, for example, a university or a university of applied science, but also a bit smaller. So for example, in some higher institutions are, for example, a faculty. For example, in Delft, we have 8 faculties, can also be seen as a part of an institution. So in a faculty level also has some specific policies for examples. So for institution level, we defined 8 dimensions, and again, for each dimension, there are 3 indicators per dimension. So I will show you how such a dimension could look like, what it could look like. And this is an example of the institution level, and then the dimension institutional support. So each dimension has a title, a short description, in this case, the manner in which an institution supports teachers and students' blended learning activities. And then again, 3 levels, and each level it's a maturity level, and the lowest level is level 1. So in this case, limited support for blended learning and teaching, aimed at the individual teaching staff and students. Then we have the second level, dedicated support. So you see this is already a bit more mature compared to level 1. And level 3, the strategic level in this case, the support of blended learning and teaching is part of the standard support service of the institution. And the next part, the continuous quality improvement, is deliberately embedded in order to improve the support of the blended learning. And this last part, you can also see, this is the continuous improvement we talk about. So level 3 is always improving yourself, continuously improving yourself. So now I hope you have some kind of idea what a dimension look like. So it has a description, a title, and also the 3 indicators. So let's go first to the course level. These are the dimensions of the course level, and I will explain them one by one. I will start at the course design process, the category course design process, and in this category we have two dimensions. So the sequence of blended learning activities, and this is really that you how you sequence your blended learning activities. So for example, that you use a model, for example, a blended learning wave, or at Delft we also use the Carpe Diem design approach or the ABC design approach is also a well-known model for designing blended learning. So this is the first dimension. So it's really about the order of the learning activities you use. That it is based on, for example, a model or a theory. Of course, blended learning, there are also tools involved. So the selection of blended learning tools is the next dimension. And this dimension describes how you select the blended learning tools and what you do to constantly evaluate which tools you're using and if you should change them, for example. So then we go to the course interaction. And this dimension describes what kind of interactions you have in your course. So for example, do you have only lecture-student interaction, or do you also design, for example, for student-student interaction, or also a student content interaction? So this dimension is really about what kind of interactions do you have in your course. Course flexibility. Well, one advantage of blended learning is that you can have some sort of flexibility in your course. So for example, students can decide when they want to study. For example, in the online learning activities, they can schedule when they want to watch a video, for example, or read a book. And this dimension describes that you deliberately choose what kind of flexibility the students can have. And also, again, the highest maturity level is that you also review this flexibility. So that you, for example, take data to see how do the students use the flexibility and should you adjust something. The last 3 dimensions also are categorized in the course experience. So this is really how the students experience the course. Do they have a good learning experience? And we have 3 dimensions there. The first one is student learning. So, and this dimension is all about the self-regulated learning for students. So in what extent does the course enable self-regulated learning? Is there some, how does the course enable the students to apply the self-regulated learning strategies, or even learns the students how to self-regulate their learning? The next is the study load. So what we often see with blended learning is that teachers are very enthusiastic and they want to add a video and a nice activity and a nice app and another article, and they don't really take the study load into consideration. And this is really bad for the students, for the course experience, because if the students are overloaded with all kinds of learning activities, they will not be able to complete the course. So the dimension study load is really about making sure that you have the right amount of study load, and also monitor that so that you can also adjust it in if it's too much or too less. And the last one is inclusiveness, and this is really the dimension about does the course also facilitates students, for example, with disabilities or with different cultural backgrounds. That's also important. So some small thing, for example, in a learning environment, in an online learning environment, for example, video should have subtitles, or picture should also have some text with it which describes what the picture is, because otherwise people who use screen readers, for example, cannot use the pictures. So this dimension is really about, is the course also inclusive for all the students? I will give some examples, for example, on the study load. We already touched upon it. So for example, how many ECTS does the course have? And if you design a course, do you really take the online and the face-to-face activities into consideration if you design a course? So I will show the dimension. So in this case, the study load is the match between the intended and the achieved study load for a course. So also the distribution and the correctness. So for example, doesn't the course have any peak? What you usually see at the end of the course, the study load is much higher because the students need to study for the exam. And in the ideal world, I think you want to distribute the load more equal over the course, and also the correctness. So is the study load, is the number of ECTS for a course, does that correspond with the study load? So in the first indicator is the study load is based on a guess. So a teacher thinks, well, this article takes about 1 hour. Okay, we will put that as study load. In the second level, the study load is based on is calculated based on experience. So based, for example, on the last couple of years, you know, this article takes the students, well, 2 hours. So this is more deliberate, more well thought of than the first level. And also the different course elements, for example, the online learning activities and the face of learning activities and the preparation for the exam are taken into consideration for the calculation of the study load. Also, what I mentioned earlier, you need to take all the elements of course into consideration for the study load. And the third level, so the highest maturity level, the study load is based on data and experience. So the experience is from the first year, but also the data. So for example, you can take data from the learning environment and see how long did the students actually use to study this video or this activity. And all the elements are included. And the last one, the study load is monitored, evaluated, and changed based on qualitative and quantitative data. So that can be data from the learning environment, but also, for example, student surveys. So in this last sentence, you also again see the maturity. So you use the data to constantly improve your course. I also have 2 examples. This, for example, is a fee calculator from Let's Rope University, and this is a tool which students and teachers can use to see what is the study load. But also, for example, this is another document which describes how you can decide what the study load is. So this is based on experience that, for example, calculating the study load, I don't see it here, but for example, how much time does it by default takes for a student to study a chapter of a book. So these kinds of tools can help teachers to really decide what study load should my course be. Then we can continue to the program level, but before I do that, I will take a short minute to see if there are any questions, but I cannot see the Zoom questions. So if maybe Lissy or Veerle, can you see if there are any questions?
There was, I think, a question. Pete just introduced a nice link to about hybrids, synchronous hybrid learning. So that's okay in the chat box, but for your part of the talk, no, there are no questions for the moment.
Okay, if there are any questions, please put them in the chat box. I will continue with the program level, and after I finish with the program level, again, I will pause for a minute to answer the questions. So the program level, this is really about programs. So that can be academic bachelor programs or master programs, or maybe another example could also be in the Netherlands, we have a lot of minors. So that's half a year where students can follow an alternative program. So you can also consider a minor as a program. So we have 6 dimensions. And again, I will explain them one by one. Again, I will start with the program design process. The first dimension is the alignment and coherence of blended learning tools. So if you have a program, what you would like is that the tools used in the program are more or less aligned. So that, for example, for a conference tool, you have like Zoom and Teams and maybe Hangout and Blackboard Collaborate. And what you'd like, ideally, is that the teachers use more or less the same tool. So that students do not need to swap between different tools and learn all new tools. So the alignment of the tools is one part of the blended learning program. Program coherence is the other part, and this is really about the alignment of the different courses. So do the courses build up on each other? Is there a clear line throughout the program? So this is really about, how are the courses aligned in the program, and how do you make this happen? So do you use, for example, a model or a theory to realize this? Program flexibility is what kind of flexibility is there in a program? So for example, are the students able to choose specific parts of the program, or is there, for example, are some courses offered online or maybe hybrid or blended or face-to-face? And do the students also have some opportunities to choose this? And I will show some examples later. And again, the program experience, this is student learning, study load, and inclusiveness. They are more or less the same as the course level. The only difference is this is focused on a program. So for example, for the student learning, how does the program facilitate in student learning? So you can imagine that, for example, first year students need much more guidance and maybe also more face-to-face time than if you have a third year bachelor student or even a master student. So also is this self-regulated learning designed throughout the program. Same for the study load. If you have a program with different courses, make sure that the study load of the courses are also aligned, so that the peak balances are also nicely distributed throughout a program, so that you don't have, for example, 2 courses at the same time, and that you have you both have an exam at the end where they need to study very hard. So make sure that this is also aligned. And also inclusiveness is also well designed in the whole program. So we are going to talk about the program level, in this case, the flexibility. And you can think about, do the students, can they select specific courses? For example, can they follow a track based on their specific interest? Can they also choose between the different mode of delivery? So do you want to have a face-to-face course or an online course? Next one, is it also possible to, for example, study part-time if you, for example, have a job, or is the program only full-time? And the last one, is it also possible, for example, to follow courses on other institutions? And I will give a couple of examples, but first I will show the dimension. So the program flexibilities, do the students have opportunities to adapt particular features of the blended learning program? And there we have some examples. So in the first level, there is no deliberate program flexibility. So there's not really a design or an idea about behind the flexibility. The second level, the flexibility is deliberately designed. So students can pick specific parts of a program. But I think the word deliberately is very important here. So you as an institution or as a program should decide what kind of flexibility do the students have. Because they need to follow the program, and if they, if I think flexibility shouldn't be a goal, but it is a means for the students. And the last level, again, it's deliberately designed. The learners have many opportunities to adapt particular features of the program. And also the flexibility is monitored, evaluated, and changed based on qualitative and quantitative data. So again, this is again the maturity part, so that you constantly assess how are we doing and make improvements based on the data you received. So some examples. The first one is from TU Delft, and at our master course, we have a lot of different tracks. So this means that the students can choose a specific, for example, topic or a field they are interested in. And in this way, they have some flexibility in the master that they can, for example, do some bit more about geoengineering, or they want to do more about environmental engineering. Another example, this is from Utrecht University from the Netherlands. They have master programs which are offered full-time and also part-time. So this is much more flexible if you, for example, also have a job. And this is another example from Delft University. We have a virtual exchange program. And this means that you can follow online education from other universities. So we have a nice picture here which universities those are. And those are usually MOOCs from another university, and also there is some assessment included. So, and this offers the students the flexibility to follow, for example, courses we do not offer in Delft. So this really enrich their program. So they can follow online education and can get credits for this online education. So this is another example of how you can include flexibility in your program. So I will again pause for a moment and then ask Veerle if there are any questions.
Yeah, there's a question about, is there any difference to calculate ECTS value for blended learning systems?
I think the major difference is that you really need to take with blended learning. What I find is that what usually happens is that teachers really going to think about what we want to offer online. So it's just more than reading a book. So that means that they really also need to think about, okay, how much time does it take? For example, a video, for example, in Delphi did a lot of research on how much time students spend on a video, and usually it's 3 times the duration of a video. So a 5-minute video takes 15 minutes to study. So I think with blended learning, it's more about being aware of what kind of education you offer, and in online, you need to also really take that into consideration. So it's really more, I think, being aware that online education also takes a lot of time. I hope this answers the question. Are there any other questions?
No, no further questions.
Okay.
Oh, wait, just one open. One is,
yeah.
Wait, just one that came in just now. Can you please explain to me what the flexibility of the program has to do with blended? Flexibility is already a part of the assessment framework used for an accreditation of all programs. I don't see the connection with the blended part of this particular model.
Well, the reason why we included the flexibility both on course and program level is that a lot of experts on blended learning state that an advantage is that there is much more flexibility possible with blended learning. And in my personal opinion, I think blended education is just very good education. I hope in a couple of years we don't talk about blended education. And I think also the same principles are valid for blended education and for example, campus education. The only difference is with blended education, you really deliberately think more about the online part. So I do agree there are overlaps between blended education and just the traditional education, if you would like to call that, but it's all because it's all about education. And we included it in this framework because what you usually see is when people talk about blended education, it's also about flexible education. If you want to offer high quality blended education, you also need to really think about the flexibilization and also make this mature. So that means that you constantly improve it. But it's true, there are a lot of overlaps between just education and blended education because it's all about education. Okay, I will continue with the institution level. And this is the third level, and this is really about an institution. So what can an institution, so for example, a university or University of Applied Science, or maybe even a faculty in some cases, can do to facilitate and support blended learning and education. So this is really about what can institutions offers, for example, to the teachers to make blended learning happen. And we have 8 dimensions, and I will explain them shortly. The first one is institutional support. So is there any support, for example, for teachers who want to offer blended learning? Is there, for example, a help desk if they got stuck with a tool? But also, is the support available for students? Because also students, they are usually tech savvy, but sometimes they also need support for specific tools. So is there some kind of support in place? Next one, institutional strategy is also very important. Does your institution has a strategy, what they want to achieve with blended learning? Because without a strategy, what you usually see is that a lot of nice things are happening, but without any idea behind it. So then you will not really go to the next level. And also with strategy, it's important that, for example, the deans and the rectors of the university also make sure that the strategy is heard. So that they also really, how do you say it, bring it into the university. The next one, sharing and communities. This is all about also our good practices, for example, of group materials also shared within the university. And are there also communities which are, for example, actively built on teachers who do, for example, something with videos in their education, or with other kinds of education, so that also the teachers can learn from each other. The professional development is what kind of things do the universities or the institutions offer to for the teachers to develop themselves. So are there, for example, specific courses, or is there coaching for teachers who want to do blended learning? So this is all about the professional development. Quality assurance. What you usually see is that especially the online part of blended learning is not taken into consideration with the quality assurance. For example, if you have a student survey, do you also include questions about, for example, the online learning environment, or about the online learning activities? And I think in high quality of a high mature blended learning environment, you also want to make sure that the quality assurance also takes a blended aspect into consideration. Well, governance is all about how does the rules and regulations and the vision and the policies, perhaps, how do you make sure that this will also be executed in the university? So are there good policies, and are they also evaluated regularly and maybe adapted based on the new insights? Finances, yeah, everything you do costs money. So for example, if you want to offer more blended education, you, for example, need new facilities. You need to have a studio, or maybe you need to have extra staff, or maybe you want to offer grants for teachers who do some really innovative stuff with their teaching. So this is also an important aspect, that there is money available, because otherwise, yeah, you will also not reach the next level with blended learning. And the last one is the facilities. So does the institution has also facilities to offer blended education? So for example, you need usually some kind of studio facilities to record videos. But also, do you have, for example, flexible classroom setups so that students can also work in groups and not only traditional lecture halls? So those are the 8 dimensions of the institution level. And now we will talk about a bit more about the professional development. And 2 elements of that are, for example, the continuous professional development. So do the teachers also have the opportunity to continuously develop themselves using training or coaching or anything else? And is there also recognition for those awards of those efforts of the teachers? So for example, do their bosses also award if they want to follow, for example, a course? Is this also possible? So, and new skills, this also, are the teachers able to acquire new skills? So this is the dimension with the indicators. So the extent to which teaching staff are able to develop their blended teaching skills. So in the first level, usually what you see is that there are a couple of workshops offered to blended learning and teachers. But that's just, okay, this teacher needs some help with video, so let's go do a video workshop. Or this teacher, we now have a teacher who needs some help with the learning environment, maybe we should offer a workshop for that. In the next level, there are solid efforts to organize workshops and courses related to blended learning and teachers. So this is more that there, for example, is a more dedicated program for the whole blended learning, so that you offer things on maybe also standing in front of a camera, or how do you use specific tools, or course design, for example. And also the blended learning and teaching activities are recognized, so that if your boss says, okay, well, why did you spend so much time on education? Because you need to have need to write a proposal for a new grant. So this is also very difficult in the academic world, as you can imagine. And the last one, all teaching staff is trained in blended learning and teaching. There's a well-aligned portfolio of workshops and courses. And again, there is also the activities are recognized by the institutions. So I will give some examples. This is a picture from Delft. And this is, we have we call it the Teaching Academy, which offers all kind of support for teachers. And some examples, we have, for example, a teaching lab. This is a physical place on the campus where teachers can come and they can find support. For example, there's always someone available. Yeah, in the COVID times, it's a bit different, but who can answer questions. And there are also, for example, some training rooms in this building, so we can have we can offer courses for teachers. And in this teaching lab, we also, for example, have award sessions, so that the educational efforts of the teachers are recognized. So, for example, the best lecture of the year award. We also have, for example, education fellows. And those are people who have an innovative idea and they want to develop their education, and they can get a grant for this. And we also, for example, have lunch lectures where teachers share their experience with others, so they can also learn new skills or learn how colleagues are doing things. And we also have, for example, different workshops about augmented virtual reality or designing blended education, or for hands-on open edX is about a learning environment. But also workshops of do-it-yourself video. How can you create videos using your laptop? Writing a script, effective use of video in education. So these are all kinds of examples on how staff can make themselves more mature in the blended learning, their skills. So I will pause again for a moment, and then I will give some examples on how you can use this model in practice.
Okay, Wiebe, there's quite an interesting question. The project embeds, so our maturity model, did it also integrate existing models? Because somebody, of course, remarks that there have been models developed, as, for example, the Higher Education Innovate model, as well as Selfie for schools to measure institutional digital maturity. So has the project integrated existing models?
Yeah, I think that was part of the first part. So the first part was the literature study and also the interviews on the partner institutions. And in the literature study, we definitely also included those existing models and use those to create the initial model of the initial maturity model. And I will, because we also validated the model, and I will come to that in a while. So maybe if there's another question after that part, then you can ask it again.
Okay. Then there's also a question about an example for quality assessment regarding flexibility with assessment, the institutional level.
And what is the question?
Yeah, it says, do you have an example for quality assessment regarding flexibility with assessment? Maybe if it's not clear, the person can.
Yeah, well, at this moment, I do not know it by heart, but what's good to know, we're also writing implementation guidelines for Embed, and there we will also offer some interesting models, theories, articles per dimension on how you can implement this in your own institution. So we're still working on it. Due to COVID, we had some other, there were some other urgent matters, but those implementation guidelines will come in the near future, and they will per dimension include models, theories, articles you can use to implement the maturity model.
Okay, there are no open questions anymore.
Okay, then I will demonstrate how you can use this model in practice. And how I used it so far is usually in workshops. I think the model is a nice start for a conversation. I think that's the most important part, that you have like a sort of shared language you can use to see where is your, for example, course or institution standing, and what do you want to improve. So in this case, what we did in this workshop is that each table, we specified this on the this was the institution level, and they first assessed their own institution and then had a discussion. Okay, what are we doing? Sharing good examples, and also what do we want to improve. So, for example, you can use we have a self-assessment tool. In this case, it's in Excel, and you can use this to assess your own institution. And what it will do, it will create a nice graph and it will show where you stand on the course level, program level, and institution level. And this again can be input for an action plan. So what do you want to change? Why do you want to change it? Who needs to be involved? And when do you need? When do you want to be? When do you want to be this be finished? And this can be used, for example, to in your own institutions create a project or rewrite policies, or maybe talk with leadership on things you want to change or improve. So in practice, I think this is the biggest advantage of this model, is that you have sort of common language you can use to start the discussion about what are we doing actually for blended learning in our institutions, and how can we use this model to improve our education. The validation of the model. So what we did is we also validated this model with experts of blended learning. So the initial phase of this project was the literature research and also the interviews in the partner institutions. And based on the interviews and the literature research, we create an initial model or initial maturity model. The second part was validating this model. So this is Delphi. We did a Delphi study. And what a Delphi study means is that you find experts in the field of blended learning. So in our case, we had 33 experts, which all had more, everyone had 10 years or more experience in blended learning. And we asked them to validate the model. So this means we, well, first, we had 3 rounds and with 32 experts from 8 EU countries, and we gave them a survey. So we gave them the maturity model, the description, also the levels, and we asked them, to what extent do you agree with this dimension? Is it important? Is it valid? Should it be included in the maturity model? And the idea of the Delphi is that the experts reach consensus. So they say, okay, this should be included. And how did we define consensus? Is that 75% of the experts agreed on a dimension and the indicators. And what do we mean by agree? Well, that they state, okay, it's 5, 6, or 7. If they said, okay, it's 5, 6, or 7, so it's that they really agree with this dimension, then only then we included it in the model. So, and this is an overview of each dimension and also the percentage of agreement. So, for example, the selection of blended learning activities in the sequence, 91% agreed that it should be included. And the average agreement is 90%. So that's, I think it's quite good. So this model is based on literature and interviews and practice. And after that, we validated it with experts on blended learning. So this also means that it's not only our opinion, but also a lot of experts in the field of blended learning agree with this model. So I think this is also why we can say this is a valid model to use if you want to do something with blended education. So the next steps of this project. Well, the self-assessment tool. The Excel version is ready. You can also download it from the website again. And we also will create an online version, like an online tool. We're in the process of writing the implementation guidelines. So what I explained, per dimension, we will describe how you can implement this, and we will suggest some theories, models, maybe articles you can use to implement this embed model. And we also had a MOOC on FutureLearn in March 2020 and September 2020, where we also shared our experience and shared the model, and also asked the participants to share their experience and their examples. So, oh, and this is a picture of what the Excel self-assessment tool looks like. So this was the presentation. This is also the website, embed.iatu.eu, and there you can find more information. You can find the whole maturity model with all the dimensions and indicators, and also other relevant materials. So I will ask Veerle again, are there any questions?
Yes, but more for the logistic team about where to find the slides of all presenters. So that's.
I guess, Liz Fan, we will provide the slides on the conference website, and we will send all registered participants links to the slides. So we'll make sure that you will get them.
Okay. And I have no further questions here.
Okay, thanks. Shall we continue then after the break? I believe you have now the time for the break. In 15 minutes, then we will return here. So you can leave your you can leave the connection on, and then we come back in 15 minutes, 11:15 European time. Come back. It's 11:15. I guess we all had our coffee and are ready to continue for the second part of this morning's training session of Embed. We will continue now with a good practice example by KU Leuven, by Veerle van Rompuy. And after that, we have sufficient time for questions. And so in the meantime, please put your questions in the Q&A box. Preferably not in the chat, but in the Q&A box. And then others can also indicate like. The questions that have the most likes will end up first to be asked. So that's helpful. But please post your questions there, or also post some examples from your own institution. So this is about the session about the good practices, and so you can also indicate some of your own good practices. Veerle, are you ready to start presentation on the KU Leuven?
I am. I'll share screen. Apparently he doesn't want to go in presentation mode. Perhaps he's sleeping.
Yeah, there's always a bit of delay, but normally it should work.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we promise not to look on the left.
I'll try to do it here. Maybe it has been opened for too long.
You can refresh.
I can do, yeah, or yes. I can do it this way. It's not really a problem, actually. If you can see the screen, so I will just scroll down. It's not really a problem that it's not in the presentation mode. So the KU Leuven practices, I will present to you several practices on the different levels. Well, but it's completely stuck. Anyway, I'll get out of them. I'll stop sharing. I'll get out of the presentation and load it back in. So maybe that helps.
We have sufficient time. Better to get it right.
Okay, I'm trying again. This is really strange. We tried it and it worked, but now it doesn't work anymore.
Okay. So you can't go to the next slide?
I'll have a look. No. It doesn't want to do it.
You can.
Okay, it's there. So, okay, is it okay? Can you see the screen like that?
Yes, now it's.
Now you should see the presentation.
Right.
Okay, great. So the KU Leuven practices. I will present practices at different levels of the maturity model. For example, I have an example from the micro level, the course level, which is the Great War and Modern Philosophy, which is a course in the philosophy faculty. Then at the micro level, at the program level, we have the Alpacas project. And then at the meso level, the institute level of the institution, that's the KU Leuven Learning Lab call. I will start with the micro level, at the course level, with the Great War and Modern Philosophy. It's an example actually in the course design process part of the maturity model. So the sequencing of the blended learning activities and the selection of blended learning tools. What makes this case interesting is that it's a blended learning course with a MOOC integrated in the course. So it's this Professor De Warren, teaching the course. And we tried it earlier on, and I have to present from here out, otherwise this will not work. Okay. Oh, now my sharing screen is paused, new share. I'll try it again. Okay, so if you see the screen with Once Upon a Time, this should be in order. Okay. Okay, so once upon a time, we had this philosophy professor, and he was doing this.
I thought I would do today is to really focus in book one on chapter one, or I think it's called chapter one. Yes, on chapter one, and to go through in some detail the evolution of a fairly complex train of thought, a kind of argument. And to do that for a few reasons. One is, as I mentioned at the beginning of the semester, the way in which I see what the purpose is.
So he can go on for that, like I'm not going to show you that because it's this complete lecture. So he was doing the typical face-to-face lectures about the First World War and how how philosophy looked upon that and how the First World War also changed paradigms in philosophy and things like that. So he had the face-to-face lectures in the classroom. But then at a certain moment in time, his dean came to him and said, yeah, well, there is this call for funding inside the university for developing MOOCs. So would you be interested to doing that? And then he said, yeah, why not? Because actually he wanted to have some video material in his course as well. So he was busy taping his physical lectures, his face-to-face lectures. He was already taping them and putting them on the internet. But he also wanted to have some more fancy material, video material, to support actually his learning activities. So he wanted to change the learning activities as well. And he thought that, okay, maybe this MOOC format would be interesting for him. So what then was developed was this.
The First World War was the original catastrophe of the 20th century. In an historically unprecedented scale, the material and intellectual resources of European nations were mobilized. This epic struggle left no aspect of Western civilization unchanged and unscathed. It was a war like no other that irrevocably transformed the 20th century, with consequences that still define us today. But in what philosophical sense was the First World War an original catastrophe? What came to an end, what found a new beginning, and what alternative paths into the 20th century were not taken? This course investigates the varied ways in which the First World War provoked philosophical reflection during and after the war. We discover the complex ways in which philosophical thought responded or failed to respond to the war and its aftermath. Did the First World War transform philosophical thought in the 20th century? And if so, how? In this course, you will be introduced to different philosophical reactions to the First World War. We will discuss and analyze texts, documents, images, artworks, and films. You will acquire historical knowledge as well as conceptual understanding, and acquire a literacy for a clearer grasp of the complex ways in which philosophy and the Great War intersected. Do you want to know how the First World War transformed philosophical thought? Do you want to learn how philosophers responded to the war and how the war changed philosophical reflection? Then please join us on this intellectual adventure.
Okay, so actually the MOOC, he made the MOOC part of his blend. So it was a blended learning concept for him. So not just a MOOC online, but he describes it himself here. So in any given week, the students would come to the physical class, then have a lecture, then would have also the possibility to, when they get back home, to go onto the MOOC. And in the MOOC, he had learning activities as well. And then, of course, they come back to the classroom and discuss them. I'm going into that later on and showing you the blended learning wave of this course, so that you have an idea with regard to the learning activities involved. So nowadays, this course is a blended course. It looks like this. Well, he will also tell you what is important for him about this course.
I would see that the MOOC is not a replacement for what we already do in the university, but an enhancement. If we organize something, we want multiple forms of presence. And one of those forms of presence will be the internet. And the most sort of viable way to do that is some sort of MOOC environment. So that would be perhaps the main reason why I would encourage others to explore doing a MOOC. So that's a real advantage of the MOOC, is that it allows a forum for individuals to discuss not only intellectual ideas, but to sort of calibrate those discussions to a responsiveness to their own historical moment, which you wouldn't have in a classroom. And it also brings together a diverse group of people, because you had the school teacher from the Philippines, the retired banker from London, and we had a military instructor from Fort Leavenworth in Kansas, and they were able to discuss the First World War, violence, Islam, etc. I would see that the MOOC is not a replacement for what we already do in the university, but an enhancement. If we organize something, we want multiple forms of presence.
Okay. So I'm going back to the PowerPoint now. Yeah, and my screen is shared. Okay, I'm sharing it anew. Okay. So that's a practice of at the micro level, Great War and Modern Philosophy. So the idea of the MOOC, he told himself, it doesn't replace the offline for him. For him, it just enhances it. So he wants to bring both parts together, so the online and the offline. If we look at his the blended learning wave involved in this course, you see that he starts with a face-to-face, in-depth lecture about what the MOOC will be about certain concepts. Then students can go online to the MOOC, where they have discussion assignments, as well as be able to read material, watch videos. So the videos he has in the MOOC were also for example, shot on place. So he went, for example, to Ypres, where he, in Flanders Fields, where he also recorded video. So that type of videos, knowledge clips as well, and also peer-to-peer assignments. Maybe you remember that we talked about student-generated content. So one of the assignments was, for example, that the students had to come up with a war poster. So they had to search for one, had to come up with a poster, a war poster, the typical war posters, and then discuss this. Well, more from a philosophical point of view, of course, discuss the poster and what the poster was telling us about that time and how you can reflect upon that now. So that's, for example, one of the things that generated content out of the students. So he also tells about that when we talked to him, I interviewed him, and he said like, okay, was really surprised about the posters that the students came up with and the things that he learned from his students during the MOOC as well. Then students come back for a lecture and they have an in-class discussion on all the material that is in the MOOC at that point. So they have in-class a discussion about the war posters, about the material that's in the MOOC, about what they've read, about what they discussed, and things like that. So that's the wave that was going on in this course. Another practice is alpacas. So alpacas is a practice in the program, at the program level of our maturity model in the program design process. So especially about the coherence of a program. Alpacas is not about these guys, could have been, but it isn't. It's about this girl. Actually, it's about adaptive learning paths for activation and assessment of students. So at KU Leuven, the goal was, and especially at the Faculty of Economics and Business, the goal was to establish active learning in all the programs of the faculty. So have the students involved in active learning. So with a lot of online material, flipped classrooms, for example, so blended learning. So have students more actively engaged in learning, so that success rate would be better. So that was a general goal. Okay, so the active learning started, but soon there were problems with this idea to implement this at the same time in all programs. There were some problems with that. Like two main problems. So when multiple blended courses and active learning approaches are integrated in one program, so if everyone starts doing the flipped classroom, for example, this might put a strain on the students. So they're really overwhelmed by this. And moreover, if courses are designed by individuals or teaching teams without the coordination at the program level, so it may result in increase. So possibly there will be a higher study load, especially also in particular periods. So if you don't have a coordination at the program level, so that was a problem that we saw at the Faculty of Economics and Business. On the other hand, so when students are only taught a limited number of blended courses in a program, so if you have like only a limited number of courses in your program that are blended, students tend to put all their effort in those. So they just start to put all their effort in the blended courses, which leads actually to an unbalanced study load for the other courses, and also deficient student learning. So that's also, so you can have like too many blended courses that are not coordinated, or a limited number of blended courses also not coordinated, but students will put their effort in those because they take more of their time. So then you have the unbalanced study load. And I also come back to what I told you earlier about just don't make everything blended. You can't activate everyone all the time. There's a problem with that. So what alpacas then did was, okay, we have to increase student success, but we're gonna do that by improving the program coherence in all the first year courses. So that was a starting point to build up from the first year courses, then second year, third year. So the project still is running. So increase the student success by changing and improving this program coherence. So how was it designed and what is the impact of this? So the Alpacas project wanted students to carry out a particular amount of active learning tasks each week. So that was defined as well. So what are the active learning tasks we want the students to complete each week? So these are directed towards achieving the learning goals of the whole program. So not of just one course, but of the whole program. In the initial phase of this project, there was 4 courses per semester that were transformed with 6 formative tests per course. And there was a project manager as well. So there's a project manager that is appointed in order to avoid individual lectures or teaching teams. So when they're designing the courses, They want to ensure that the deadlines, learning activities, that it all is aligned across courses. So that's why a project manager also was appointed. And also a board of stakeholders was put in place. So a board of stakeholders that met every semester. So students, teaching staff, so to discuss the experiences and to suggest improvements. In addition, also Alpacas also worked with learning analytics at the level of the courses and the program. And these learning analytics were then in the board of stakeholders also documented, were shared. And based on that evidence and the evaluations, also regarding the student experiences, the study load of the program, so was adjusted. So it's actually what Pete also put in the chat earlier. So you have the actual study load, but it is assessed via a feedback system, via this board of stakeholders, so that the program can gradually be adjusted to the study load. Because, you know, it depends on what kind of student you have. The study load actually also depends on that. So for some students, it's not much of a study load, for others it is. So there you have the assessment, the feedback loop in the project. Well, so that's the Alpacas project. As well, the philosophy course, so the Great War and Modern Philosophy, as the Alpacas project, are projects that got funding from the KU Leuven Learning Lab. So the KU Leuven Learning Lab has a call, it's university-wide, so inside the KU Leuven, and they have different calls for to get resources for your course, to improve your course, to have new ways of teaching. So there are different calls for that. And I have a little clip on that one as well. It's about the finances, so the funding that we have to have new teaching methods introduced in faculties and departments.
KU Leuven Learning Lab is a university-wide initiative to stimulate educational innovation. It opens a call for proposals every year and finances educational projects. These projects fall into innovative themes, for example, to further the use of technology in education, to promote blended learning environments, or the implementation of different pedagogies that tackle education, like a research project. At KU Leuven, teachers, didactic teams and educational support staff are constantly looking at how they can support students' learning process even better. Sometimes these groups need a financial boost to realize their ideas. The Learning Lab helps fund and launch these proposed exploration and innovation projects. In this way, we focus on the realization of two policies of the university's strategic plan: going digital and future-oriented education. According to the size, scale and the idea behind the project, different types of projects are funded. There are micro-projects for didactic teams, seed projects for larger innovations and scale-up projects for wider rollout. A seed project helps stimulate innovations. They have larger budgets up to 60,000 euros. These are projects with explorative ideas over using technology for education, blended learning or activating students. This innovation is linked to a specific theme in KU Leuven strategic plan each year. The theme of this year is online feedback and continuous evaluation. An example is the Alpacas project proposed by the Faculty of Business and Economics to blend courses using adaptive learning paths. The Alpacas project proposes that all first-year students should have exposure to formative testing and stimulating feedback in order to shift their efforts to the areas they need to focus on. This project was initiated in October 2019. Let's talk about scale-up projects. Consider a team of experts have come up with a successful innovation. These could have arisen spontaneously without financing, or it could be a seed project that is successful, or an initiative with additional funding from another source. What if they can have a wider rollout? Perhaps another program or department also wants to implement this. Perhaps a university-wide rollout is possible. Take the Alpacas project, for example, if it is successful in achieving its goals to activate students. Then it is possible to consider an expansion. A proposal is submitted. The Learning Lab's steering committee selects 2 projects per year. Then it will be in the scale-up phase to investigate the feasibility of the expansion. They are awarded additional funding up to 50,000 per project. If the rollout is considered feasible, the project will go to the implementation and production phase and can grow. The more popular funding opportunity that several didactic teams apply for every year are the micro-projects. These are innovative digital learning projects for didactic teams or a teacher who can use a financial impulse to redesign their courses to a blended learning format. Teaching teams can submit a micro-project 3 times a year and are awarded budgets from 3,000 to 10,000 euros. In its first year, there were about 30 projects approved. To inspire more applicants, many projects are showcased on the Learning Lab website. Additional details of the chosen projects and funding are available on the intranet. Now you know all the different funding opportunities by the Learning Lab.
Okay, so I'm at the end of my presentation, but presumably you will have some examples and practices as well. So I'll stop sharing my screen. Okay.
Veerle, there was one question.
Yeah.
About the MOOC. The question is, when the history professor uses the term MOOC, is it referring to an open course but not massive? Or is it also an open massive course?
Yeah, it started as not massive, but for the moment, yeah, it's also an open course. He just put it open on the internet, but it didn't start like that. So he started it as for his own students, you know, for his own course, his own students. So as a SPOC, actually a little small one closed, yeah. But then he also after a while he also opened it up. But then yeah. the importance of the team and working with a team comes in as well, because then he had teaching assistants who, for example, also spoke Chinese, because he had quite some students from China then also following the course. So, you know, then the team, working with the team was for him also one of the key points in introducing the MOOC. Yeah.
Yeah, so it was really also an online learning experience for the students, not only content.
No, not only content. Yeah. No, it was also an online learning experience, yeah.
Okay, another question. How many of these different projects do you have, and what is the overall budget per year?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not from the KU Leuven Learning Lab, so I could not really answer that question. But if you go to the, I will otherwise put a link in the chat, or I think the link is also in the clip of where the projects are featured. So if you look at the the scale-up projects, that's what Anneleen, who's the head of the KU Leuven Learning Lab, also told. It's like 2 a year, but that's the larger budgets. So then you talk about larger budgets. Then if you have like the seed projects at smaller budgets, like a 50,000 euros that you get for a seed project, the scale-up projects could be like larger projects. Yeah. Okay, Pavani, who is also in connection with the KU Leuven Learning Lab, is saying that she thinks it's 5 seed projects that are awarded a year. Thank you, Pavani.
I see no more questions, so I guess everything is clear.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess for those participants who have sort of question, can do this still now. Other questions maybe in the chat. Otherwise, it was indeed very clear. And already rich information to digest, I guess, for the participants. All the in the box answered have been answered, I guess, because there are 13 answered questions. Do you differentiate between ICTs and face-to-face learning and blended learning? Oh yeah, Wiebe answered that in the box. Are there any of these questions, Wiebe, that you answered in the Q&A box that you think should be shared with the audience?
Yeah, I think the question about what you said about the difference different tools for ICT and for online learning and face-to-face learning. I think the most important, I will put on my camera, maybe that's I think the most important thing with blended learning is the learning activities. So really focus on the basic design principle, like the constructive alignment. What kind of learning objectives do you have? What kind of assessment do you have? And what kind of objectives, assessment, and learning activities. And if you design your learning activities, then you should look at, okay, what kind of learning activities should be online and what kind of learning activities should be face-to-face. And after that, you can decide on which, what kind of tools you want to use. But in my opinion, it doesn't really matter if you have, for example, a tool like Zoom or Microsoft Teams or Google Hangouts or Blackboard Collaborate. Doesn't really matter. It really matters what you want to do with the tool. So that's also the same for face-to-face. If you want to, for example, have a clicker system where you can ask a question to your students and they can reply, and you see the results on your slide. You can use Mentimeter, but there are also other great tools. But the main message is think about what do you want to achieve with your learning activities, and then see what is the best tool you can use.
Yeah, thanks. I'm wondering here if this question was answered. The European Commission has developed the Higher Education Innovate model, as well as Selfie for schools to measure institutional digital maturity. Has the project Embed integrated these existing models?
I think Wiebe already answered that during his talk, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so now I'm just going through the questions here. No, there are no further open questions. Okay, then I believe we can close this session by thanking you, the speakers, Veerle and Wiebe, and of course also the team of Embed that is participating in the background and that contributed to all the content of Embed and developing the model. Tomorrow we will look further into the Embed training in really breakout sessions with the attendees. That will be an interesting exercise of really working with the maturity model. And for this afternoon, I invite all the attendees also to join when we are focusing on the topic of micro-credentials. And that will start at 2 o'clock with the same link to this Zoom room. Thanks again, and hope to see you this afternoon and tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Bye.